I think it's fair to ask, at this rate, how many more generations of working women will have to accept 20% less pay than men and face retirement with nearly $500,000 less in assets? For too long, women and girls alone have been on the front lines of fighting for women's equality. It is time for men to realize that we all benefit when women have a seat and a voice at the table. What will it take to finally move from making progress to actually being there when it comes to gender equity? These are small questions, small moments of intervention, but they matter. Because for so many of us, gender bias is always around us and within us, unknowingly. It's the very air we breathe.
Welcome to the Baha'i House of Worship for the North American continent. Today's gathering is the culminating event in a 9-week Light of Unity festival. This festival is a part of the global celebration of the 200th anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah's teaching centers on the inherent nobility and oneness of humanity. We are one human family, all created by one loving God. The recognition of our oneness can transform the world, and I'm going to repeat that. The recognition of our oneness can transform the world. So to begin our program, Emily Dreke is here with us this evening, Vice President of Development Communications from Chicago Foundation for Women, CFW. Do you know of CFW? You should. Any CF? Okay, can we get a, okay. Emily Dreke is responsible for growing the resources and public profile of a foundation that has awarded over 3,500 grants total, over $31 million to organizations advancing basic rights and equal opportunities for Chicago area women and girls. I'm all for that. Before joining Chicago Foundation for Women 6 years ago, Emily served as the Assistant Director of the Alumni Relations and Annual Giving at the University of Chicago, where she developed fundraising campaigns for the university. Prior to that, she served as a U.S. Senator Russ Feingold's Deputy Finance Director for more than 4 years, helping raise over $10 million during the 2010 election. Emily received her BA with top honors, might I add, in political science and French from University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was just out there today. She is a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Phi Beta Kappa, and a 2016 graduate of the Allstate Foundation's Greater Good Nonprofit Leadership Program. Recently, Emily completed executive education in nonprofit finance at the Kellogg School of Management and coursework in how to mobilize your nonprofit through the Harvard Kennedy School of Excellence in Education. She lives in Chicago with her husband, Vince, and her son, August. Please welcome Emily.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you for inviting me and giving me the great honor of speaking. I know that my boss, Sujata, Kay Sujata, as she's known, was supposed to be here this evening. She sends her regrets. She's unable to be here tonight due to a death in her family. So I hope that you will join me in sending her peace and love, wishes of those. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to join you in community and in fellowship during the Light of Unity Festival. I am a Unitarian Universalist, and as I took the time to explore the unifying principles of the Baha'i faith, I was struck by how at home I felt. Harmony of science and religion, race unity, gender equality, and oneness of humankind are all fundamental components of the Unitarian living tradition. We just might use different words. Of course, it is the unifying principle of equality between men and women that we come here tonight to discuss. As you well know, the Baha'i writings state that until women are provided equal status to men, humanity cannot advance or progress. Abdu'l-Baha has compared men and women to the two wings of a bird and the two hands of a human body, and stated that both need to be strong for advancement. Later tonight, we'll be able to have the unique opportunity to hear from Layli, who will talk about her transformative work, safeguarding human rights and fighting gender-based violence at the national and international level. I've been asked to share a local perspective of the movement for gender equality and how each of us can activate in big and small ways so that women and girls are safe, secure, and financially stable. No way around it. We're living in critical times. A time when we are seeing escalating threats to health, safety, and security for women and girls. To be certain, a movement for gender equality is a daunting endeavor, but progress is not a tide, pushing us forward into the future. We must push for progress. We must act. Every day at Chicago Foundation for Women, I've seen the work, the success in action. I've seen women and men from all walks of life giving fully of themselves, their resources, their time, and their talents to change the future for women and girls. Now, I would like to take just a few moments to introduce you to some of these individuals and show you a video that will celebrate them and show you people just like you and me who are bringing their authentic selves to the movement and making change. If you'll please show the video. Thank you.
We need all types of activists
to actually ultimately create change.
All of us come bearing different gifts.
You can harness what you have
so we can move forward faster.
Chicago Foundation for Women invests in women and girls as catalysts, building strong communities for all. In today's climate in our country, immigrant and refugee women are particularly vulnerable.
You just never know, am I gonna see my aunt again? Am I gonna see my uncle again? Is my mom gonna be here? I just can't stand by and not do anything. Chicago Foundation for Women, the Women United Giving Council gives me that opportunity to work towards justice. My family experience, my personal experience, that's the expertise that I bring to the table. When women get together and put their resources together, that's when you really see that transformation moving.
The National Immigrant Justice Center reached out to our firm. This client needed pro bono representation. If Fiore did not get asylum, when she was deported to Eritrea, she would certainly be imprisoned and maybe killed. I had sleepless nights thinking, have we done everything? The relief and happiness that I felt when the judge finally said, I'm granting you asylum, you'll be released tomorrow, cannot be matched with any experience I've had in my life. Beyond the lawyers, Fiore needed assistance with anxiety and trauma. She needed a place to stay. She needed economic security. She needed to find a community. I don't think we're doing service to women in Chicago if we're not connecting these issues. It's great to have Chicago Foundation for Women to make sure that we're all working together.
Women's health, women's economic security, and freedom from violence are interrelated, and we cannot think of one without the other.
I came to the United States because I got married. My marriage turns out to be abusive. When I decided to finish my marriage, I didn't have any money. Looking for a job was really, really hard.
Many immigrants and refugees end up taking low-wage jobs when they come to this country because the barrier to translate their credentials. Chicago Foundation for Women is delighted to support Upwardly Global, provides training opportunities for new immigrants and refugees to help with the culture and the nuances of working and living in the U.S.
After taking my training, I felt more confident to even apply for a professional, nice job according to my skills. I work for Nielsen, the TV ratings. I get to talk daily with different people, persuade them that their opinion is very important. This is a real life. This is a real professional life.
Oftentimes, immigrant women and girls will not report their abusers because they fear either the abuser will be deported or they're financially dependent on the abuser. Heart Women and Girls promotes sexual health and sexual violence awareness in Muslim communities. Chicago Foundation for Women has been instrumental in helping us get to a point where we're not just doing a one-off program, but we are able to think about strategically where we want this work to go. CFW gave us our first grant, but they know that it doesn't just take a check to get work off the ground. Through collaborative partnerships, Chicago Foundation for Women supports organizations to address a solution from a different perspective that you may not have considered because it's not your field of expertise or it's not your worldview.
We need all kinds of activists to create change. Philanthropists, corporate leaders, direct service providers and seekers, individuals, system change advocates. We have to be all in and go all out.
Thank you. 32 years ago, Chicago Foundation for Women, or CFW as we're often called, was founded on the principle that when women and girls are stronger when they act together. At CFW, we believe that when you invest in women and girls, they can become catalysts and build strong communities for all of us. Our work is focused on expanding opportunity and removing barriers by investing in organizations and leaders that work on ensuring the success of women and girls, enhancing economic security, access to health and health information, and ensuring freedom from violence. This year, CFW made its largest annual investment in women and girls since our founding, awarding $2.3 million in grants to Chicago area nonprofits serving women and girls. That means fewer women struggling with housing, food, or economic insecurity. It means a new generation of leaders, of girls, raising their hands and making their voices heard. It means more women receiving life-saving health care. From direct service to advocacy and activism on issues critical to women, CFW is supporting 135 organizations impacting over 75,000 women and girls in our region right now. Over the past year, CFW grants have increased the average salary for 422 women, many of them single mothers, moving them from an average salary of $12,000 a year to $32,000 a year. This is made possible by providing women not only skills-based training with pathways to good-paying jobs, but also the additional support services they need to keep them in the program and on a pathway to economic stability. These support services include quality and affordable childcare, safe housing, and credit and financial cleanup. While direct services for women and girls are critical, the reality is that not every woman and girl who is standing in line right now waiting for help will get the help that she deserves. The line is simply never ending, and the resources are not. That is why a fundamental component of our work at Chicago Foundation for Women is to challenge the systems and the policies that create the need for women and girls to stand in that line in the first place. We take the long view, including supporting organizing, advocacy, and policy efforts. Whether it's supporting policies like stopping the shackling of pregnant prisoners in our jails, or supporting paid sick leave, we are committed to full access to opportunities for advancement, freedom from violence, and quality health care. And I'm happy to say that these advocacy investments pay off. Over just the past 2 years, CFW's investments have helped pass over 30 pieces of pro-women and girls legislation in the state of Illinois. One example of our power of advocacy is the work of Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation, which we have been supporting almost since inception. Their End Demand Illinois campaign is shifting law enforcement's attention to sex traffickers and people who buy sex, while proposing a network of support for survivors of the sex trade. CASE's policy work has led to the passage of 6 laws that offer protections to survivors of the sex trade. Chicago Foundation for Women has been a key player in the local women's movement, joining with thousands of others to challenge inequity. And much progress has been made. But in order to better understand where progress has occurred and where we have work to do, CFW has partnered with the McKinsey Global Institute to gather and share data on women and girls' health, safety, and economic opportunity in the Chicago metropolitan region. In the report that we released this fall, CFW looks at key indicators that reflect women's ability to live safe, healthy, and productive lives. The report identifies 3 areas where women and men in the Chicago region are near or at parity. First, women are almost equal to men in labor force participation in the Chicago region, resulting in nearly half of all women now being the primary or co-primary breadwinners of their households. Second, women are growing in ranks and reaching parity when it comes to professional and technical jobs. And finally, women are graduating from college at historic highs. However, the research also identified several areas where women can benefit from greater opportunity and investments. And I have a few slides for this part. I come with extra stuff. There we are. So you can start from slide 2, please. Okay. All right. So, despite increasing education and career opportunities, women in our region are still underrepresented in corporate management and in political office. Women in management are outnumbered by men 2 to 3. The city of Chicago has not had a woman mayor since Jane Byrne's term ended in 1983, and the state of Illinois has yet to elect a woman governor. Women also continue to bear a disproportionate burden as mothers and as caregivers. In a single year, the average woman spends 80 additional hours on care work compared to the average man, the equivalent of 2 full weeks of paid work. While teen pregnancy rates have declined over the last decade as access to contraception and comprehensive sexual education has increased, progress has recently stalled. And perhaps most disturbingly, women are victims of violence at epidemic rates, with over 1 reported incident per every 2 women in Illinois. In Chicago, there were over 123 reported incidents of domestic violence per day in 2016. This number does not reflect the violence that we know goes on behind closed doors and remains unreported. Knowledge is power. This data will help CFW and all of you, hopefully, to make informed, evidence-based decisions about where we direct our collective attention and investments in order to move closer to gender equity. So, we know where we are, and we have some idea of where we need to go. How do we get there? 50 years after the passage of the Equal Pay Act, I think it's fair to ask, At this rate, how many more generations of working women will have to accept 20% less pay than men? And mind you, that gap is much larger for women of color. And face retirement with nearly $500,000 less in assets. What will it take to finally move from making progress to actually being there when it comes to gender equity? A few years ago, we decided to ask Chicagoans this very question. We listened to 500 women and men, girls and boys, nonprofit, faith leaders, corporate leaders, and survivors of violence, foundation heads, and government representatives. We heard that economic security for women and girls, freedom from gender bias, they aren't women's issues. They're issues of basic fairness. We heard that the movement must be inclusive and focused, where every sector of our community is working from the same playbook. We need strategies that are comprehensive, that address the underlying issues from every perspective, whether they be legislative, civic, professional, or even personal. From thousands of ideas, we launched the 100% Project. The 100% Project is an all-out, all-in, coordinated effort to increase women's economic security and put an end to gender bias in the metropolitan Chicago region within a generation. No big deal. Specifically, the 100% Project outlines 3 key strategies to accelerate progress toward gender equity in our region. They are: 1, increase awareness to break individual and institutional gender bias. 2, engage new and unlikely partners to find common ground, collaborate. And 3, build, scale, and advance policies and programs that support gender equity. So now I'm just going to briefly share a little bit about each of these and what you can do personally to advance them in your communities, your work, and your home. So let me start with what is perhaps the most important and yet most complicated piece of the gender equality puzzle: gender bias. Gender bias is not a topic that comes up often for many people, and yet it impacts all of us. For anyone who has ever been or is currently a parent of a young child, you know that the assigning of rigid gender norms begins as early as infancy. Research has shown that when a volunteer adult is assigned to look after what she is told to be a baby girl, that she encourages the baby towards soft toys, pink plush items, and dolls. If the volunteer is looking after what he or she assumes to be a boy, it's all robots, cars, trucks, and puzzle toys. When asked why they pushed the gendered toys and behavior onto such young children, volunteers respond that they were completely unaware that they had done so. I see this in my own life when interacting with my 3-year-old son, August. Just yesterday, I was reading him a book. It was one of the Berenstain Bears books. Do you know it? Okay. I had to stop in the middle of the book and ask out loud, why does the mother in the Berenstain Bears always wear a house coat and rarely leave the house? Have you noticed that? And I turned to August and I said, now that seems like a depressing existence, doesn't it? He just looked at me kind of confused. These are small questions, small moments of intervention, but they matter. Because for so many of us, gender bias is always around us and within us, unknowingly. It's the very air we breathe. That's why CFW is confident that having intentional conversation is a necessary step on the path to solutions. To end gender bias collectively, we have to know where we stand individually. So, step 1 is clean up your own house. Conduct a personal gender bias inventory. You can even take an implicit bias test on the internet. Read about gender norms and the impact they have on all of us. Talk about gender bias here at worship, in your schools, in your workplaces, and in your homes. You can also participate in Talk It Out, a key initiative of CFW's 100% project. Talk It Out is a region-wide, week-long series of conversations about bias that takes place each year during March, Women's History Month. For the past 2 years, Talk It Out has engaged over 1,200 people through 100 conversations. Through this public education initiative, CFW is learning how Chicagoans experience gender bias and how gender bias is influenced by race, sexuality, or social location. The second key strategy of the 100% Project is that we must engage new and what some might call unlikely partners in the movement for gender equity. For too long, women and girls alone have been on the front lines of fighting for women's equality. It is time for men to realize that we all benefit when women have a seat and a voice at the table. We need men and boys to join us, not just as allies, but as leaders. Men and boys from all ages and backgrounds can make a difference, whether it be by being a role model at home, by taking on more caregiving and housekeeping responsibilities, or at work through formal support and sponsorship of your female colleagues. At CFW, we are engaging men in leadership positions in the private and public sectors to join the movement as champions for change. In short, CFW's male champions commit to 3 things. I'm saying a lot of threes this evening. 1, send a strong message to employees, fellow corporate leaders, and others in the industry that they are taking a lead role in advancing women within their industry. The second is showcasing their commitment to gender equity by publicly sharing those goals and a planned strategy to advance women within their company or their organization. And third, be willing to regularly measure progress toward goals and lessons learned so that other companies may follow suit. And up here we just have 2 examples of our male champions of change. We have 13 recruited so far, including City Treasurer Kurt Summers. Finally, true gains for women and girls will not be realized unless we address the systems and institutions that govern our lives. As Elizabeth Broderick of the Australian Human Rights Commission put it, public policy has the capacity to either perpetuate or eliminate discrimination and gender inequality. It is only by making gender a central consideration in the development and implementation of public policy that we can hope to advance gender equality and women's human rights. The question is, how do we do this? One of the simplest ways is to ask, are women being left out of consideration? Do women have a voice and a seat at the table where policy is being crafted? If not, how can that be corrected? And what difference will it make? We can understand how certain policies assign women and men distinct attributes, characteristics, and roles. Consider the stereotypes of men as breadwinners and women as caregivers, both of which are commonly found together in a wide range of public policies, including areas of taxation, employment, and childcare. When public policies enforce or perpetuate these stereotypes, rather than allowing individual men and women to determine responsibility for breadwinning and caregiving roles for themselves, they can exacerbate inequality between men and women. So to change the world for women, we also need to change the world for men. Otherwise, we risk ignoring the core of gender inequity, the construct of masculinity and male privilege, which are equally harmful to men. Mujan Momin writes that the goal of achieving equality of women and men in the Baha'i faith does not amount to bringing women into power in masculine roles, but instead a more radical change to the very nature of society to make feminine qualities more valued. Advancing gender equality in a policy context is not just about including women's voices or removing barriers to women's participation. It's about transforming the institutions and structures that cause or perpetuate discrimination and inequality. I am reminded of the story of Rochelle, told by our grantee, the Family Defense Center. Rochelle had 15-month-old twins and lived with an abusive boyfriend who was also the primary breadwinner in her household. Unable to afford childcare, Rochelle's job options were very limited. One day, she decided no more. She stood up to her abusive boyfriend. She fought back, and in doing so, the police got involved. She faced losing her children then to the child welfare system. She was held responsible for the domestic violence against her due to a policy in the Department of Child and Family Services known as Allegation Number 60. Rochelle was deemed a neglectful parent, alleging that she had created a harmful environment for her children. Thanks to the Family Defense Center's advocacy, subsequent legislative changes have led to the redefinition of DCFS's Allegation 60, clarifying just what exactly it constitutes a harmful environment for children, so that children can stay with their parents if they're not being harmed by violence, and that victims of domestic violence or women suffering from postpartum depression aren't punished for seeking help. This is but one example of how a gender lens can be a factor in examining and implementing policy. I urge you to examine how gender equity can be incorporated into a range of issues that you're concerned with, whether it be climate change, public education, affordable housing, tax policy, and community health. Before I close, I will add one more thing. I know we are here to discuss equality between men and women, but the pathway to a thriving future must include everyone along the gender spectrum. As our president and CEO, Sujata, said at our 32nd annual luncheon just a few weeks ago, the future is female. It is also Black and brown, trans and queer, immigrant and undocumented. My liberation, our liberation, the liberation of all women is tied with those who are most vulnerable among us. To achieve gender equity, we must challenge the exploitation of women and girls, unequal power dynamics, and the belief that there is a hierarchy in human value based on one's gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability, and economic status. To end gender bias and gender-based violence, to allow women to make decisions about their bodies, to see more women in leadership roles, to give women access to equitable wages, to encourage young women and girls to be all that their hearts desire, we need everyone of all gender identities. Despite all that is happening in the world around us right now, I continue to dream. I imagine a future where my son can grow up to be a caretaker, a dancer, a poet, or a nurse, and society would value him. A future where your daughter can be a physicist, a construction worker, a welder, or President of the United States, and no one would think twice. Together, we will build the Chicago that women and girls deserve, that we all deserve. This future is not only possible, but within reach. It just needs you and me to push for it. Thank you.